Welcome to Limelight Arts Travels podcast, A Closer Look. Pella, in northern Greece, has given us many outstanding finds connected to the time of Alexander the Great and his father Philip of Macedon. In this episode, archaeologist Dr Kristen Mann joins Limelight's Dr Nick Gordon to talk about the Stag Hunt Mosaic. This incredible mosaic is made entirely from coloured pebbles. Despite the few variations of colour that were available to the artisans, this work has an amazing painterly quality. But its original location, in a 2,000 square metre house, also opens a window onto how social relationships, ideas of community and of masculinity, were changing with the rise of Macedon in the age of Alexander the Great.
Well, welcome back, Kristen. And today we'll be looking at this extraordinary mosaic and talking about some of the context around it and what it reveals to us about changing times. So perhaps you can start by telling us about what it is we're looking at.
Okay, so this is a Hellenistic pebble mosaic. It's a very particular type of mosaic. And it was found in the Macedonian capital at Pella, and it dates to about 330 to 300 BC. So it's just around the time of Alexander's death, or just after it is when it dates to. So it's the beginning of the Hellenistic period proper. It's found in what's called the House of the Abduction of Helen, which is named after a much larger and grander mosaic in the room immediately to the west of it. It's the largest mosaic in the Hellenistic world, actually, that we have. It's like 8 meters. It's this massive, long mosaic.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it's huge. So often this mosaic is often overshadowed by that one. But the use of the word house is a bit of a misnomer. This is a mansion. This thing is huge. It occupied an entire city block in the city, and it's in one of the most prestigious locations right next to the Agora, the center of commercial and civic activity. So it's huge. It's over, let me find actually the dimensions. I've got them here somewhere. But it's quite large. It's in its footprint, so excluding its second story, it's 2,400 meters square on the ground floor. Its courtyard is 500 meters square, and it's got multiple mosaiced rooms that are all throughout it as well. This is a massive house, one of the richest citizens in the city of Pella. And it's still in situ in the house as a replica in the museum. This mosaic that we're looking at here is called the Stag Hunt Mosaic. It's a square-shaped mosaic, not a rectangle. It's more like the conventional Greek dining room called an andron is what we're actually looking at here. We know it's from one of these drinking spaces because the room it's in has an offset doorway that's meant to facilitate the ability to have your reclining couches placed around the outside of the room. So this mosaic is a big square that would have been at the center of this. It's the mosaic's about 3.2 meters roughly, and it didn't extend to the full side of the room. There was a narrow band of just plastered sort of flooring. So the key focus though is this central figured paddle, but it's actually only about like a third of the size of the mosaic. Most of the mosaic, you've got this really elaborate decoration. It starts with this wave pattern, this geometric stylized wave pattern in a narrow border around the outside, which is an allusion to movement and dynamism, but also seafaring, but also drinking, because when you drink, you sail the wine dark sea with Dionysus. So you've got this stylistic theme going on in here. And then a much wider boundary, which has got this really elaborate, incredible vegetal decoration. I won't have time to go into it, but the decoration here is actually anchored in two opposite corners. There's a structuring diagonal line through this mosaic. And the vegetal patterns are 3D and detailed. They use perspective and foreshadowing. They're really quite elaborate, but it gives you this just general background noise impression of curly vegetation, like you're in this wild, natural world. And then at the very center, you've got this square, which is much starker at first glance. Rather than ornamental sort of, really elaborate curling vegetation, You've got this sharp-lined square with this stark black background, against which these figures stand out. And what you're actually looking at here are two young men in these very particular poses. The men are fully starkers. They're totally naked. Their bodies are on full display. They're standing in these power poses that actually have this long tradition going right back into the classical and archaic world that are associated with heroes and virile young men. But they're fully naked apart from these short cloaks that are these hunting cloaks that have these, they're there partly because they add to the drama. They're flaring out in this really elaborate sort of way that indicates movement and violence and drama. But they're also a symbol of young men who are in military training. They're actually part of the Athenian ephebe uniform. I can never pronounce this right. It involves, it's called a hamlis. And so it actually signifies a young man he's left childhood and he's entered into the beginnings of his civic duties, but particularly his military training. And there's this close connection between hunting and military success, which we'll kind of come back to maybe. But the young men both have short golden hair. One of them, in between them, they're actually hunting a deer, but they're not hunting with bows and arrows. They're not on horses. They're not part of a team. This is close and personal. This is raw, primal male there. And you've got the men are predicted in these powerful muscular bodies. They are calm, they're determined. And the deer is freaking out. This deer is surprised. Its tongue is hanging out as it's bleating in panic. Its eyes are rolling. One young man on the right has grabbed the horns of this stag and is lifting a short sword over, ready to strike. And in the corner is this little feature that looks like some people on Reddit. There's hilarious comments about this on Reddit, by the way, about, why married couples should go hunting a deer naked for bonding. But what it's got is something that one user commented and saying it looks like a UFO. It's actually his hat in the midst of the action and the surprising swiftness and speed and power of his movement. His hat's gone flying off into the corner. And the other man is on the other side on the left. He has got two hands holding his weapon, which is a very particular double-sided axe, this battle axe. It's associated with the god Hephaestus, but we'll come back to that in a second. And he's raising it with two hands over his head, ready to strike. And then down in the front, if you go to the corner opposite the flying saucer hat, there's this really realistic rock that adds a bit of weight. And this is the diagonal line. It's balancing and structuring it. But right in front is this dog that's leaping forward. And it's actually, the artist has used foreshortening to actually give you a sense of 3D perspective here. The entire figures, they look like a painting. They've got shading and elaborate. Not only are they realistic in the outlining and the proportions, but the shading is incredible. And it's all done with tiny little stones. And the dog is the first one in. It's actually, there's blood coming out as it's savaging the stomach of the deer. And underneath, you've got a sense of the topography with this rocky ground. It's actually made of lots of different colored pebbles to create a sense of texture. And when you look at the pebbles, actually, some of the background pebbles are a little bit more spaced apart, but the figures are really tightly compacted. So you get this sense of volume and space in the depiction through the placement of the pebbles, not just the shading and the colors. The colors are kind of muted because they're using natural stone. So you get this sort of sense of black and gold with shades of gray and white and pale yellow throughout it, but it's pretty limited.
But it's amazing the range of color they've been able to achieve with only a very small range of colored pebbles to work from.
These guys had the artisans definitely had a small army of slaves that are carefully selecting and sorting pebbles by size and color. But before I move on from the imagery, though, there's a few cues here, too, that suggest who we're looking at. These figures aren't named. The inscription you see at the top of it is actually the artisan. It says, "Gnosis made me." So it's a signature. It's one of the very rare signatures we have in mosaics. And so this one had a statement. This artist wanted to claim this imagery. Unlike other mosaics, we don't have figures named. So it could just be two young men of military age, but you've got a few clues. One is the hairstyle. The elaborate sort of sweeping up of the young man on the right, who's holding the deer, has got the sort of supreme first touch on the deer. It's a suggestion that it's Alexander the Great himself. It's the style, and I mean, Alexander, the Hellenistic period, invented Western power iconography and this visual schema that's used to express divine sort of dominance, actually. But there's a lot of cues here that suggest it's Alexander, but he's not named. The axe in the other figure's hand is curious. It's associated with Hephaestus, but Hephaestus is a crippled deity. This guy is not crippled. And so there's a hint that actually potentially we're looking at the general Hephaestion, who is was Alexander's closest companion, potential lover. But I mean, Alexander's friends and other generals were very jealous. He even sparked the jealousy of Alexander's mum, like any other new bride mother-in-law rage. So this is a particular potential reference to these two people. And so some people have even said the dog is actually named as potentially being Alexander's favorite dog. You know, people discuss the deer could represent the Persians and victory over enemies. But in general, hunt scenes were used to talk about success, to talk about power, dominance, and there's a very strong theme with military success and training and strategy and the development of young men. So in this time period, we actually even get some written treatises by like Xenophon and other authors that talk about why hunting's the noblest of pursuits, why it's good for the city to train young men, to teach them courage, coordination, and all sorts of other skills that they need to be successful warriors and leaders. So there's quite a lot going on in this.
Yeah, there is. And you mentioned that this is in one of the humble houses, humble 200,000 square meters, 2,000 square meters. One of its drinking rooms. And just picking up on this vibe, was the drinking room a mixed drinking room, or was that drinking room kind of a male-only space?
This is a male space. The names of these, particularly these square drinking with an off-sided doorway, this is what's called an andron. So literally the Greek word for man. And it's a space that traditionally was associated with the classic symposia. It's a very different type of drinking note to what we see in the Hellenistic world under the kings. The drinking in classical Athens is what one scholar calls diacritical drinking. It's a means of articulating belonging and separating and differentiating those who don't belong, not by expressing largesse and power and sort of dependency through one person providing the food or the drink. In fact, food had nothing to do with the Greek aristocratic sort of banquet. The food and the eating happened beforehand, if at all, and it was separated by rites and rituals, including all guests standing up and clapping their hands once, and libations, and the tables would be pulled away and the couches brought in, and then the drinking starts. So drinking in classical Athens had nothing to do with nourishment and the provision of food essentials. It's this social activity, and it's all about knowing how to drink. You needed to drink and show that you belonged, because drinking the Greek way was very challenging physically, motor skills, but also intellectually. It emphasized equal participation. Everybody must participate in the drinking, in the games, in the poetry, spontaneous songs. This is not... If you're a social introvert, you would have hated classical Athens, because if you're a young man or any man, you had to go to these things and you would be put on the spot and have to spout a poem or sing a song or demonstrate your cleverness as you'd work around in a circle from moving anti-clockwise around to the right. The drinking and the wine moved in that direction, the games and pastimes, and everyone participated. So the Greek classical symposium is about equality. Even if things aren't equal, there's an illusion of equality. In the Hellenistic world, this is not what we see. As I said, this is one drinking space. It has the shape of the traditional one. It's got the idea as well, especially in the classical one, everything's about equal participation and connection to all of the guests. It's why it's a square. It's why it's equal sides. There's no head of the table. There's no prominent position. Officially, the host would sit in the couch immediately to the right of the doorway, so they could set the rules and dictate the order of performances and how much water and wine would go in. But in reality, this is just one of many rooms. that could be done. Those rooms could be used all at once for a massive, massive feast and party. The Hellenistic world also very firmly brought feasting and mixed food and wine in a much more distinct way. It moves on to what's kind of called a patron feast, or it's about this empowering feast where the person who had the money to pay for the entertainment and the food and could reward those loyal to them with food and parties, basically, while also offering a forum and a venue to negotiate relationships and have a bit of tit for tat and economic kind of back and forward, articulate social powers and relations and politics. It's a very complicated scheme. So the room to the west of this, these rooms are on the north side of the house, and the room immediately west is that giant rectangle. That space could not have had this idea of equal connection with all participants. This one is a more intimate one. So this is one where a host could have a more private gathering among semi-equals, but still be the person who's offering it. But you could also be part of a giant party where there's spaces for more intimate connection, or it could be, it's a much more complicated deal, drinking in the world. In the Hellenistic world, sorry.
So you've got different power relationships. So you've got more vertically structured relationships, but also things like this, which is almost like a breakout room for kind of.
Yeah, it kind of is. But it's still a room too where like this idea of equality, and also I should add, the classical idea was all about self-control and discipline. Dionysus was dangerous. He gave you this wonderful, fabulous out-of-body experience when you drank wine and came closer together, and the world was a beautiful place. But it's also supremely dangerous. So there's a lot of codes and etiquette, and being drunk, fully out of control was not a cool thing. But here in the Hellenistic world under the kings, there was this need for dominance. Like Philip and Alexander had to outdrink their men in many ways. There's a lot of discussion about the barbaric nature of Macedonian drinking. We don't know how much. We've got to take some of those things with a grain of salt, because they're by some very bitter Athenian writers who resented them and are using the fact that these guys don't mix water into their wine but drink it neat, to highlight how, even though the Macedonians claim to be the cultural inheritors of Greece, and Athens by this stage is impoverished and vulnerable to co-option, but it also maintained this massive cultural currency. So the Greek trappings mattered, the Greekness and civilized nature. Alexander was famous for sleeping with a copy of Homer under his pillow. Like, classical education was important. But you've got this very military man's world of power, dominance. You are the best. You can control and dominate your men, whether in drinking, in war, in performance. It's a very different world. So it is a breakout room, but you've got this really complicated dynamic that changed depending on event and who was there and the purpose. Why is the host hosting this party? And I should also add too that probably around this time, the person who owned this massive mansion, strong chance that they're a military guy that made their exceedingly exorbitant wealth through the conquests of Alexander. So there's a very strong connection that's where the money came from that funded all of this.
And that would then kind of, I suppose, that would then kind of perhaps influence the choice of the subject matter if they have that references to Alexander and Hephaestion. Then this is kind of almost kind of my crew in some way, perhaps, or just reinforcing that association for people who might not remember, or perhaps, or is it more?
Would remember, but it is interesting that they didn't overtly write those names. I mean, this is making a statement, but it's, it could have just been aesthetics. The mosaicist was like, I'm not putting names awkwardly into this. This needs a simple elegance or something. It could have been like that, but it could very well have been political. It could also well have been unnecessary. So much of the visual semiotics of these objects, we have to play Sherlock Holmes, but locals wouldn't. Those cues would be readable and immediately intelligible to many people. So maybe an inscription would be redundant. Everyone who saw that's like, that is Alexander, that is Hephaestion, and that's his bestest doggo, and they are bringing down the enemy. It's hard to say, especially because we don't know who owned the house. So it's harder to kind of get that sort of nuanced detail.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to talking again soon and hearing some more of you.
Yeah, most welcome. I'm delighted.
You've been listening to Limelight Arts Travels podcast, A Closer Look. It was recorded on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land and their elders past and present.